One of the biggest tests of the season is coming tomorrow night against Clemson, and it might be one of, if not the most interesting matchup of the season.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be previewing one of the biggest matchups of this early season, Kentucky versus Clemson on the road in the ACC SEC Challenge. In my opinion, one of the most fascinating matchups on Kentucky's schedule. We'll dive into that matchup. We'll talk about what Clemson does well, what they've struggled with, what we know about the Tigers, how we think this game is going to go down. Of course, we'll do our weekly market down segment as well. Wrap up the show, we'll take a look at the top 25 for the fun of it, because Kentucky is climbing right now. It's a really interesting time to be a Kentucky Wildcat. This week will prove a lot of things about Mark Pope and the Cats. We're just going to have to see how it all goes down. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You can start your season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and they can get $150 in bonus bets if they win their first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Thank you guys so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. And if you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribe to the show. And if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, let's go ahead and get into it. Kentucky in a massive matchup against, according to Ken Palm, the 25th best team in the country. According to Bart Torvik, the 44th best team in the country. That is the Clemson Tigers. In case you have not seen these recaps, or these previews and recaps, first of all, thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to be doing what we normally do. We're going to talk about what we believe the opponent does well, and we're going to talk about what we've seen from them as far as what we've seen on tape. We're going to talk a little bit about numbers. We're going to talk about their head coach, how they have played stylistically underneath him. Then we're going to get into some of their bigger games and kind of how they fared in those matchups. Did they struggle? Did they have success? Where did they have success? And then we'll break down specific matchups. Usually I like to give two different players for the opposing team that are major problems. I think for Kentucky, we may have a little bit more today, depending on kind of where I want to go. What this game will come down to, we'll give a final score. And of course, like I mentioned, market down, our segment where we give hot takes, and then the AP Pulp. So what do we know about the Clemson Tigers? Well, like I mentioned, they're number 25 on KenPom, number 44 on Bart Torvik, which is another computer analytics website. Clemson at 7-1 so far this season. Not the strongest resume, but they've already played three teams inside the top 100 of the KenPom ratings, and they are 2-1 in those contests. We'll be taking a look at all three of those games to kind of get an idea of what maybe Kentucky will do later on in the show. But the Clemson Tigers 7-1 with a very experienced head coach at the helm. That is Brad Brownell. He is 271 and 190 during his time with the Clemson Tigers, previously at Wright State for a hot minute there as well. He is coming off of back-to-back 23-plus win seasons, two of his best seasons here with the Tigers. Obviously, made the Elite Eight a season ago, lost to Alabama there in the tournament. Historically, what has Clemson done well under Brownell? Well, they've been much better defensively, at least whenever you go and look at the metrics. But however, these past couple of seasons, as Clemson has started to have more success, they have become more balanced. Their offense has just simply gotten better. There's a slow, methodical pace. They've consistently hovered around the bottom third nationally in pace and adjusted tempo. And they like to beat you through their defense, but because of the efficiency that they brought along offensively, they're becoming more of a legitimate opponent and more of a respectable threat. Obviously, again, 24 wins a season ago, Elite Eight appearance. They were catching fire offensively. They were playing well defensively. And what brings this team together? Efficiency, balance, right? It is the physicality. That is the biggest thing for me here on today's episode. Watching this team, seeing what they do in terms of numbers, this is a very physical squad. And I don't just mean physical in terms of what they do on defense. I'm talking about what they do at the rim on both ends of the floor. And that's going to be a big talking point when I break down kind of what I believe will happen in this game. So that's what we know in terms of surface level. They've got a solid head coach that's performing as good as he has during his time at his school. Clemson at 7-1. Some analytics sites think that they're really good. Others think that they are good but not great. I have seen a lot of really positive things in their 3 biggest games of the season, which we will break down here in just a second. And then they've got a couple of really solid pieces at the top, most notably Chase Hunter. Chase Hunter, will go ahead and talk about him briefly. Hunter leads the team in scoring. We'll get more into kind of like what he is later, but he is a 6th-year guard that is shooting out of his mind from 3, and he played really well in a game that we'll discuss in a moment. But Hunter is the life force of this squad. He is what's driving that backcourt. Huge matchup. We'll go ahead and identify that one for Kentucky. Their resume, they've beaten some really bad teams. They've competed against, 3 solid teams, none of them being great, but solid. And they were competitive in all 3 of those games. They won 2 of them, Boise State, San Francisco, and Penn State. They lost to Boise. They beat San Fran and Penn State. All 3 of those games were fun to an extent. I watched all of them. I'm going to break down here for you guys kind of what we saw. Where did they struggle? Where does Clemson go? How do they like to play? And what could we learn as far as maybe what Kentucky could do in this matchup? We'll dive into it here in just a second. Before I do it, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. You can tackle the NFL action this season with FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150, in bonus bets if they win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything that you need to place live bets on the NFL, and it's all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you can view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, continuing along here on the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, Lance Dawe hanging out here with you, previewing Kentucky basketball's matchup with the Clemson Tigers. We know what they are on the surface, but let's break down here their 3 most important games so far this season: Boise State, San Francisco, and Penn State. Again, they are 2-1 in those matchups. How did they fare, and who did they go to, and what did they look like in all 3 of those games? You're going to see a theme while simultaneously seeing Clemson win in different ways, which is going to lead into my explanation as to why I think this is such a fascinating matchup. Against Boise State, Clemson only scored 71 points. Chase Hunter, their leading scorer, went absolutely ballistic in this game. He had 30 points on efficient shooting. He was extremely confident and aggressive in transition, taking 3-pointers in the first half. It made the game competitive for an extremely long period of time. Chase Hunter was one thing. He went off, and it didn't matter. They played a very, very physical, driving to the rim type of basketball throughout the game. They went on, at one point, Boise State, who was playing a very similar style of basketball, they went on a run with about 10 minutes left that included a couple of made threes, baskets from their big-time players, which were physical wing guard types, and they were able to hit a couple of big 3-pointers there in that stretch to give them a lead that they kind of held on to and then maintained there at the very end of the game. Both teams, though, physical, driving to the basket, and not a ton of fouls were called. It was not a big-time free throw game. It was just a very physical one. Ian Shefflin, a forward for the Clemson Tigers, is somebody that I want to go ahead and identify alongside Chase Hunter. They are our 2 big-time matchup guys here. A 6'8", 240-pound forward. He is a senior. He's been at Clemson for a hot minute. All 4 of his years spent here with the Tigers, he is not a transfer player. He is shooting very poorly from beyond the arc this year. He's a typical stretch 4. Last year, he shot 46.9%. 2 years before that, he shot over 30. This year, he's started 4 of 18 from 3, which is just good for 22.2%. But this is a stretch 4 that Kentucky needs to be very aware of in the post. Yes, he can shoot threes, but he has done such a good job around the basket, grabbing up rebounds, finishing at the rim, getting a block or two every now and then. He's shooting almost 57% from the rim so far this season, which is decent for a stretch 4 like him. It's the back to the basket game that really fascinates me with Shefflin. What does Kentucky do against it? Because it's not necessarily height when it comes to physicality. It's the weight. Shefflin at 240, yes, that's maybe prototypical for a forward or a center type player, which Shefflin does play a little bit of the 5. But he's just super physical when it comes to with his utilizing his weight down low at the basket. And this was something that they did a little bit in this game that was impressive to me, that they were able to get the ball to their bigs in a variety of ways at the rim, and they were just able to go up through people and finish. They were caught sleeping in transition a few times, especially late, as they began to overcommit or just lost sight of what was happening whenever there was speed on the ball. And I think that is really important, and we'll explain it more here as we continue along. But that's how they lost to Boise State. They both played a physical game. Chase Hunter and Ian Shefflin were impressive, but Boise State made a couple of big-time shots, went on a run about 3/4 of the way through the game. Clemson could not keep up, and that was that. Against San Francisco, they won 70-55, Clemson did. They played in a hideous gym. I just want to note that off the top. And it's the slowest game Clemson has played all season, and this is a team that likes to play with a slower pace. They were efficient from outside. They were like 7 of 17 from 3, and they were average in the paint, statistically. I want to point this out because I wrote it down here in my notes. At one point early on in the game, the announcer for this one said that it could be a potential track meet, which I find funny considering, again, this ended up being both the slowest game that San Francisco and Clemson have played all season long. San Fran is just number 29 nationally in 2-point offense. Or excuse me, they're not just, they are 29th nationally in 2-point offense. They score very well at the rim. And they shot just 15 of 27 from 2. Just 15 of 27. Clemson, again, I wrote this down after watching the game, controlled things at the rim with their physicality and weight. This team does not average a ton of blocks. They only average 3 a game, but they're just big down low, and they got guys there that are experienced that can play well. You've got different guys like Chauncey Wiggins, a 6'10" junior. Again, Ian Shefflin, who's a senior. Victor Lakin, who's a 6'11", 245-pound senior. That's their most utilized player, according to KenPom, in terms of major contributors. Now, he doesn't shoot like a ton, but he shoots the most, and he's able to do a couple different things in terms of rebounds and then assist rate as well. Victor Lakin, a solid center, splitting time there with Ian Shefflin. Christian Reeves, a sophomore, a 7'2", 253-pound sophomore. He gets in the mix here as well. They've got some height down low, and they utilized it a ton in this game where San Francisco, the shot selection was not great, and Clemson was able to kind of control things. Another thing to note here, 14 offensive rebounds for Clemson in this contest. Chase Hunter was aggressive with the shot making as well. He's got some solid size at 6'4". Fun little note here, actually, before we break down the Penn State game. KenPom likes to do this thing where if you go and click on a player, it will show you players that are statistically similar to them that have either played in the past or are currently playing that season. And one of the top comparisons for Chase Hunter, this lead guard that averages over 16 points for Clemson, is Marcel Davis, who played at Utah Valley in 2016 underneath Mark Pope. Just a fun little fact there. Maybe Pope thinks about that whenever he's doing the scout, if he sees some similarities. I tried to go and find some film on Marcel Davis. I could not, but I'm sure Pope is thinking about obviously how to break down Chase, but maybe he thinks about this. This is somebody that he's kind of seen before. Okay. Excuse me. Oh, my goodness. Yes, I did just pause the podcast, and I've had some really rough coughing lately. That one took me by surprise. So, Penn State, the final game I want to look at here today. Physicality, tough shot making from Shefflin and Hunter. It's been a theme. Penn State. This is where things get a little weird. Penn State shot 58% at the rim, and they lost. Penn State found a way to obliterate Clemson in pick and roll, speed with the ball. They had lobs, they had finishes, or flashy finishes, I should say. And they still lost. Why? Well, it's because they went 4 of 18 from 3. Clemson, again, their P&R defense was not phenomenal, and they got lost in transition consistently when Penn State guards and ball handlers used some speed. This was a game that Clemson won 75-67, a game that went down to the wire. And it was turnovers and a couple of miscues late for Penn State that ended up costing them the win. 18 assists to just 17 turnovers for Penn State. Clemson, a team that if you go and look across the board, they're good at creating turnovers, but they're not like crazy good. And for them to do that, I mean, it seemed like they were playing Penn State, who was fast, very aggressively. Or maybe they had to play Penn State aggressively like that because Penn State was fast. Efficient at the rim, poor from 3. Opponents here across the board. If you go and look at Boise State, if you go and look at San Fran, if I'm not mistaken, San Francisco actually shot okay from 3. They made 8 3-pointers, and they still lost. So it's an interesting dynamic here between these 3 games where Clemson is trying to play a physical brand of basketball. It didn't work against Boise, and it worked against San Fran and Penn State. They have faced some different-looking teams. San Francisco incredibly slow. San Francisco incredibly fast. Boise State, slow. Penn State, if I'm not mistaken, is also has a little bit of tempo to boot. Yeah, they're extremely quick. So they're facing different varieties of tempo. They're facing different varieties of efficiencies. And yet they've been able to kind of maintain who they are, even though shooting splits have looked a little different. Also in the Penn State game, I do want to note, Clemson went 9 of 19 from 3, which was big. They drew fouls. They hit their free throws. They took 20 free throws in this game, which was I think that's the most I've seen out of these 3 games. And they had hot 3-point shooting down the stretch. Kentucky, this is going to be a tight game. We're going to have to make sure that they can't let the game get away, kind of like the game got away from Boise State. So what's this game going to come down to? What are the big matchups outside of Chase Hunter and Ian Shefflin? What do we need to know about Kentucky's big-time players in this one? We'll do Mark It Down. We'll do an AP Top 25 update as well. Coming at you here in just a minute. Before I do it, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Game Time. Game Time is the place that you need to go. Hey, if you're looking for tickets, if you're in the Clemson, South Carolina area and you want to go see this game, you need to go to Game Time to get tickets right now. It is the place to go to get tickets for any sort of college basketball event, not just college basketball. NBA, NFL, MLB, any sporting event you want. And on top of that, you can get tickets to anything outside of sports, comedy, theater. I've been to a couple different concerts and went straight to Game Time to get the tickets. I've been using them a couple years now for college football and basketball. Love Game Time, and they have this new feature called Game Time Picks, which filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through all the different tickets at the different event. It will show you right there immediately what's the best that they have to offer. They've got all-in pricing, so you're not confused about what you're going to be paying at checkout. They've got seat views, which end up being better in person. That's not a bit, like that has genuinely been my personal experience. They've got ticket coverage as well. You need to take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time Picks by downloading the Game Time app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right, wrapping up the Monday edition of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to break down here what we believe is going to happen in this Clemson-Kentucky game. So the two matchups we talked about that are huge. Chase Hunter, in his sixth year, shoots 46% from three. He's averaging 16.4 points. He's not finished his season shooting over 35.5% from deep, so he's shooting very, very well to start the year. Shefflin, struggling to shoot to start the year, but a bulky postman that can hit the three, but really has a solid back-to-the-basket type of game. You're looking at somebody else possibly like Victor Lakin, who could be a major problem here for Kentucky down low as well, one of their most utilized players. Miles Foster, a 6'7" senior transfer from Illinois State, who is a big-time physical forward as well. Not a three-point shooter, but he can finish well at the rim. At 6'7", 245 pounds, they're just big and physical. Those are the four guys here that I'm really looking at. Shefflin, Hunter, Foster, Lakin. You can also toss in Wiggins as well there, who's also a solid stretch 4-5 type player at 6'10". Height, physicality, three-point shooting. What Kentucky does with Amari Williams and Brandon Garrison, I think, will be crucial in this game. That's where I want to start. You cannot let Ian Shefflin and Victor Lakin outplay Amari and Garrison. You have to win that battle. And I don't mean scoring. I mean all around, specifically rebounding and protecting the rim. All around, yes, you can get your points. Rebounding and protecting the rim is very important. Rebounding on both ends. You have to make sure Clemson doesn't get second chance points. They get 12.5 offensive rebounds per game. They've got a solid offensive rebound rate. It's one of the better things about their extremely well-balanced offense. Amari, coming off of a really good game, you have to have him lock in here. If Garrison is available, which I expect him to be, you have to have Garrison here playing well, grabbing rebounds. Kentucky is the best team in the nation in grabbing defensive boards. Best in the country. You got to make sure that stays true here. Controlling Chase Hunter with Lamont Butler is also going to be big. Butler and Otega Dawe, I should say. This is a guy that will pull from anywhere. This is a guy that will get into the mid-range and knock down shots. Smooth, buttery jumper. It's just a clean 6'4" guard that can handle, and it's just solid. He's a bucket getter. How Butler faces off against him, how Dawe faces off against him is big. Kentucky needs to be aggressive with their speed, both in the transition game and in the half court. Penn State gave Clemson problems. Kentucky needs to utilize their speed. They've got players all over the place that are fast. I think Andrew Carr against Ian Shefflin as well is also going to be really important. So it's Amari Garrison and then Shefflin versus Carr, which I think will be a pretty common matchup in this one. And then to give you my final thing, like what this game will come down to. Outside of Kentucky's aggression, offensive reboundings, controlling Chase Hunter, Shefflin, Carr, Amari, Garrison, Lakin, Wiggins, etc. I need to see a good game from Jackson Robinson. There are several different moments within the three games that we discussed where Clemson gets caught in pick and roll stuff. They get caught sleeping on cuts to the basket, and somebody like Robinson could be a really solid benefactor based on the way that Pope likes to run him in that sort of high paint area, I guess I should say, with the different sets and actions that he runs. Robinson could have a good game here. I need to see him have a good game. All right. Who will win this game? I think Kentucky should win this game. Ken Palm thinks Kentucky will lose. Torvik thinks Kentucky will win. I think Kentucky should win this game. After watching Clemson, it comes down to the things I just mentioned. And can Kentucky prevent themselves from shooting 22% from three like Penn State did? Because I see a lot of similarities between Kentucky and Penn State. If you can do that, then absolutely you can. Absolutely you can win this game. And I'm not saying by a lot. I think this will be incredibly competitive, I should say. It's the SEC ACC challenge. So I think Kentucky does take it. I would lean towards the Cats getting over 80. I would lean towards Clemson getting somewhere between 74 to 80. I think this will be on the slightly higher scoring end. I would take Kentucky, we'll say 81-76. That'll be my final score prediction here. All right, mark it down. Our segment here that we like to do. I know that my camera died, just bear with me. Mark it down is the segment of the show that we like to do every week where we give a hot take prediction for the upcoming game. Mark this one down. Kentucky's going to hold Chase Hunter underneath his scoring average of 16.4 points. I think Kentucky holds Chase Hunter. What they do against Shefflin and the crew down low is another conversation. Hunter, I think, Dawe and Butler combined will control enough to keep him under that scoring average. That is my hot take. Let me know what you think about that in the comments below, by the way. And then to wrap up the show very briefly, just want to point out, Kentucky has risen all the way to number 4 in the AP Top 25 rankings because of the chaos in college basketball last season. Over half of the top 25 lost. A good portion of those teams lost multiple times. And here we are now with a top 25 that starts with, at the top, Kansas, Auburn, Tennessee at number 3, Kentucky at number 4, Marquette at number 5. Isn't that an interesting top 25? Kansas, Auburn, UT, Kentucky, and Marquette. Gonzaga lost. They dropped 4 spots to number 7. Iowa State lost to Auburn. They dropped 1 spot to number 6. Purdue rose 5 spots to number 8. Duke rose 2 spots to number 9, despite being 5-2. Alabama dropped to number 10 after losing. Wisconsin is now 8-0. They're up to number 11. Oregon is 8-0 and number 12. Florida jumped 5 spots to number 13. Cincinnati's 14. Baylor is 15. You've got Memphis. Houston, who is 4-3, dropped all the way to number 17, dropped 11 spots at 4-3. Pitt at 18. Illinois at 19. North Carolina now 4-3, dropped all the way to number 20. Oklahoma, who is 7-0 and is overperforming expectations right now, I should say. I am impressed with Porter Moser and the crew. They're number 21. Texas A&M dropped 2 spots to 22 at 6-2. Ole Miss has kind of stayed at 23 for pretty much the entire season so far. San Diego State in the top 25 at 4-2. And then UConn. Oh, UConn. Who lost 3 straight games in Maui, was projected to win that tournament. Top, easy path, former national title, or back-to-back national championships. Lost 3 games in Maui, finished dead last in that invitational. They are at number 25. Frankly, they should not be ranked. Michigan State was like a dozen points behind them in the AP poll. They should not be ranked. Kentucky at number 4 is interesting. Can the Cats, at the very least, split this week 1-1? Can they go 2-0 somehow, starting with a win over Clemson tomorrow? We'll see. That's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On UK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDaw_, and follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and God bless.